second leitmotif.
Okay. You might actually be right. Let me just double check.
Rhubarb, custard and apple. Come on, it's nearly 5 o'clock. I'm allowed to be slightly gloomy.
Working. Oh, come on. There we go. Are we live? That looks like
You've only been teaching 5 years. Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh,
Term 4, 2018.
way more experience on that.
All right. All right, I think we might be cooking with gas.
Excellent.
Let me just double check. Okay. Who knows how many people are actually here, but at least this is going to be recorded.
That's true. So we have one person, his name is Declan.
Well, he might have left and then he'll come back.
Did you want me to turn my laptop back on?
No, we're good. I'm just, again, double checking that the stream's all good to go. We've still got a minute.
Do you want to plug that into?
Oh, there are 4 people watching now.
Good grief.
2 of them probably me. Just on different accounts.
One way to boost your numbers.
Yeah. Alrighty.
Do you create false Facebook accounts so that you can like yourself?
No. Not anymore. Oh, come on. All right.
Was that recorded?
It was.
You can edit that, I'm sure.
All right. I think we should be good to go. Hello, Alex Roseveare.
Hi, Daniel Tomlinson. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. It's Tuesday. It is Tuesday, isn't it?
Yeah.
It feels like Wednesday.
It
feels like a Wednesday.
Yeah. Hello to everyone on YouTube, wherever you are tuning in, and thank you for joining us. As Alex said, I'm Daniel Tomlinson. I'm the president of PLEAWA. We've organised a brief little Mythbusters session, just a bit of a masterclass to take you through tips on essay writing and maybe break down some of the misconceptions that students have about essay writing. So hopefully it will be useful to you and it's something that you can come back to in the next couple of days. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will probably look at them towards the end of this session so that my attention isn't split too much.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is probably really good given what's happening next Monday with our politics and law exam for Year 12s. So probably good timing. And if you have plenty of friends out there you want to help in the competition for ATAR, forward on the YouTube address to them.
Absolutely. Last week on the PLEAWA Instagram account, I just thought it would be good to ask students what they wanted to know about essay writing just in preparation for this. And apart from a lot of questions on introductions and conclusions, I got an interesting question, which was just, why are they so hard?
Yeah.
And so I thought it would be a good idea to start there and talk about, why they take up so much of the politics course, why they are quite difficult, and also why it might be worth your time investing in practicing essay plans and preparing yourself for the WACE exam. And I came up with the following. So essays represent 50% of the exam mark and at least 35% of school-based assessment.
It's huge.
Huge. And if you do essays as validations for investigations, inquiries, it actually goes up to almost 45%.
Yeah.
So that is almost half of P&L.
Exactly.
in some schools.
And if you just think about it, one essay in the ATAR exam is worth 12.5% of your final politics and law score, all other things being equal. That is more than usually 2 in-class assessments that go for 50 minutes each.
Absolutely. And the reason I think they take up so much of the course, or the assessments at least, is that it is probably the highest level assessment we can offer. It requires you to synthesize your content knowledge, and not just, a shallow level of content knowledge, quite a depth of knowledge, as well as skills, the ability to actually articulate an argument, the ability to link that argument to relevant evidence that is detailed. And as you were telling me, like being able to do that with questions that often require you to discuss multiple things.
Yes, indeed. It is what makes politics and law both extremely interesting and also a subject that is very intellectual and very academic. You've got to have good historical knowledge. You've got to have a really good grasp of the key terms that we use. But ultimately, I'll take that word, that synthesis, that capacity to bring all these what look like disparate points in the syllabus, and hopefully by this stage in the course, that's term 4 of year 12, you understand that almost every single aspect of the course links to each other. And in many ways, that's what the essays are trying to draw out from you, your ability to show that you can think broadly, but you can think deeply as well.
Speaking of like things that like link together, when you have a look at this essay marking guide, one of the reasons I think they are quite difficult is that many parts of the essay marking guide feature, or like if you think about evidence, or if you think about terminology, it features in more than one section of the marking guide. So for instance, if you have a look at just evidence or examples, it features not only in your sort of discussion part of the marking key, but it also features in the evaluation part. You can't have a sound argument without evidence to support it. And it also features in your conclusion, because you need to draw that evidence together.
Your conclusion is your appeal to the jury to find your argument guilty or not guilty in any way. So you've got to bring the evidence back into it.
Same thing with terminology. So obviously we expect you to demonstrate your understanding of relevant terms throughout the essay, but if you can't do that, then there's very little chance that you're going to have a cogent discussion. And if you don't understand the basic concepts that you're discussing, you can't evaluate.
Indeed, and you must treat your marker as an intelligent person who knows little about the topic you're writing. So even choosing which terms do you define is actually a really important aspect. And I'm sure, Daniel, you've read a number of essays that were fundamentally dictionaries for the first page and a half.
Oh boy. And I think, well, first we'll start off talking about essay structure just in general, but we will get to the introduction fairly quickly, because so many people, so many students wanted to know about it. But first, before we get to the specific part of the essay, let's talk about essays in general, because one of the often spoken about myths is that
my favorite.
Well, it's really just what essays should look like, or that there is one form that an essay should take. And particularly, essays should include an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion.
Well, 2 of those bits are right. The 3rd body paragraph, 3 body paragraph is definitely a big myth. As I just said then, the conclusion is like the appeal to the jury from a barrister. An essay is in many ways something that you should predicate on the legal argument that is used in court. If you have a client, you're not going to use the 3 best pieces of evidence you've got. If you've got 10 outstanding pieces of evidence to prove your claim, you're going to use them. So why in an essay would you limit yourself to 3 main points? Or worse, why would you have 5 or 6 really good points and you cram them all into one paragraph and hope that the reader of the essay at 11 o'clock at night is going to be able to discern and break away all of those components?
I do think that maybe this myth has come from this 3 body paragraphs is often just what students, in terms of the amount that they write, that is often just what they are capable of within 50 minutes.
That's very possible. I also think it's actually come from the lower years, where we first introduced writing essays to students in quite often years 8 and 9. How much should I write? Well, the easy response is just give me 3 good points. And then that just keeps on going through. So by the time they're in year 11, it's ingrained in them. And I'm sure you've seen them, Daniel. I have seen paragraphs that are 1 3/4 pages long.
Absolutely. Well, I looked for a bit of advice on this, and I know that this is a source of advice that students can access as well.
Absolutely.
So they can head to the SCASA website, they can head to the Politics and Law section, and they can actually find the summary reports from all previous WACE exams. And this is feedback from the markers as to what they have seen in the exam and their advice based on that. And really, you can see, I'm not going to read the 3 parts that I pulled out for you, but really it comes down to your essay. There's no standardized format, but it should be tailored to the essay question. And you should structure your essay based on a thorough understanding of what that question requires.
And that is, to me, probably the biggest concern markers would have. It's certainly one I have with my own students. Do they choose the question that looks easy? by reading it, or do they choose the question that they have actually planned a response for? And for as time poor as you are, I don't think any student should be choosing to do an essay simply because that one looks easy and the other one looks hard. Spend your reading time in your head writing down notes as to what you could actually answer. Quite often, the very easy questions end up being very, very broad and can be actually quite difficult to nail down the key points.
Yes. All right. So let's delve into, I guess, the nitty-gritty of an essay, and let's start with the introduction.
Yeah.
This is a myth. My introduction should include all relevant terms, or sorry, definitions for all relevant terms.
Okay, for me, I think you need to define. Usually, there is at least one, if not two, key terms that are prescribed in a question. To me, I find most of the questions that are asked are questions in two parts, sometimes even three. I saw one yesterday with, from a political and legal perspective, the Governor-General is both powerful and unaccountable. To me, there's three components in there that you've got to be able to look at. So sometimes you do have two or three key things you might need to get out of the way very early in order to define. But if your essay is going to start with a series of definitions, you're not going to pick up those 5 marks for introduction. Those 5 marks for introduction are the equivalent of a small test that you did sometime during the year. So your introduction, I think, needs to be very carefully planned before you put pen to paper.
Absolutely. And I think this myth comes from the fact that on the marking guide, there is this little section that says, explain relevant terms and outlines parameters of discussion. But what's interesting is that nowhere in this section does it say the word introduction.
Nope.
So really, if you want to define relevant terms, you don't have to do it in the introduction. You can, as Alex said, you really want to identify what are the critical terms that need to be in my introduction, and you want to define those and explain them in a bit of detail.
Yeah.
But you can also do them in the body paragraphs.
Absolutely.
So if I'm talking about the influence of political parties on the lawmaking process, then in a body paragraph, I might focus on major parties. It's suitable then, logical,
absolutely,
to define major party at the start of that paragraph.
And then you bring in your example,
absolutely,
which is where a mark would be allocated.
Absolutely. The alternative is there might be some sort of minor relevant terms that as you go, it's important for you to just show that you are aware of what they mean. And a useful way to do this is, say, in the middle of a paragraph where you are talking about the functions of Parliament, and you're talking about the fact that the
executive dominance,
100%. Standing orders is not like the focus of that paragraph.
No,
but it is an important relevant term.
Correct.
So you could use something we call it an appositive, which is basically a phrase that describes the noun before it. So if the noun is standing orders, you put a comma after it. You write a phrase, a short definition, the rules that govern the conduct of parliamentary business.
Yep.
Another comma, and you have defined that term.
Definition.
You've explained it.
Because your marker is intelligent, they'll be able to extrapolate from those handful of words exactly what standing orders means.
Absolutely. And having nice, concise definitions, I also think
that's something they should practice.
Yes, that is something they should absolutely practice, outside of just preparing for a 2-mark question.
Yeah, well, a 2-mark question is actually a far more detailed definition. If they're asked what is meant by the term executive dominance, then that would require 5 to 6 lines to get the 2 marks.
Absolutely. So what should an introduction look like?
Well, 4 dot points there.
Yeah, I think this is the best that I could come up with.
I think it covers it. I think it certainly does. Look, your introduction has to introduce the reader to what it is you're planning to argue. One, what is the question? Clarify what the question is, what the question means to you. It is actually quite interesting in this course that I've said this so many times. I've said an essay question, and the student has seen it in a very different way to what I was expecting, and yet still got it right.
That's my favourite.
And they are my favourites. They're the ones that make me think and realise that the students can actually think quite broadly in what's going on. So you need to be really clear about how you see the question. You need to state where you stand on that question. If it's an evaluate, you need to describe your evaluation in some way. That is, that there is substantial evidence that the claim is strong, that there is limited evidence that the claim is strong. You need to be able to put those in. You've got to define the key term, or perhaps there might be a second term in it. And something I like my students to do, but it isn't always done by everyone. I treat it like a barrister before a jury. This is your opening statement. The evidence I'm going to use is, if you said major parties, influences on major parties, you might say, Influences such as those internal, the party room, the role of the President of the Senate can influence, while external features such as pressure groups, lobbyists, and opinion polling. Sometimes just adding those additional bits in there really guides the marker as to where you're going. But what's great for you is the psychology. In your head, you now know you need to talk about those things. And when you're going back over your essay, have I talked about what I meant to? Oops, no, I forgot to mention lobby groups. And therefore, you can put those things back in. And that's why I say the introduction needs to be very carefully planned. You need to know what it is you're going to talk about.
Well, absolutely, especially because, as we said, you will mention that evidence in your introduction. You will obviously include it in your body paragraphs, but then you'll come back to it in your conclusion. So in a very structured way, you are guiding your readers through the evidence that you are going to use and why it is valuable in supporting your argument. Outside of key evidence, which you only need to briefly introduce in the introduction. You don't need to go into
detail.
No, not at all. And we'll show you an example of that in a moment. Obviously, definitions for critical terms, those that feature in the question or are directly related to the question in some way. And then a brief outline of your supporting arguments. And in my mind, this is what it means by parameters. You are setting, because of some questions, you could talk about many, many things.
Yes.
If you were asked to, for instance, analyse the roles of the High Court, obviously that's not the exact question, but like analyse the 3 constitutional roles of the High Court. There are so many that you can choose from.
Yes.
So you are establishing for the reader, here is what I'm going to discuss in my essay. Here are my supporting arguments. This is how it contributes to my overall thesis.
Indeed. And that is actually your path to 25 out of 25. So many students assume I can't get 25 because I can't talk about absolutely everything. Well, if you've declared in the introduction that the 3 biggest things about the constitutional roles of the High Court are, then you're on a much stronger path to ensure that you are bringing to the attention of the marker, these are the most important things. And I will also say the marker knows you can't write everything in the space of 50 minutes, so they're not going to be cruel to you.
Okay, so let's have a look at, throughout this presentation, we're going to show you an introduction, a model body paragraph, and also a conclusion. And all 3 of them are for this question, which featured in last year's WACE exam.
It did indeed.
Formal and informal methods of constitutional change have significantly altered the Commonwealth Constitution. Evaluate this claim with reference to referendums, referrals of power, and unchallenged legislation. Your favourite, because obviously all 3 can change the Constitution, can't they? Look at that when we go through what you've written.
Look, this question is actually one that I suspect a lot of students would shy away from because it looks so big and it's so complicated. But if you're using your 10-minute reading time well, you'd actually be looking and going, referendums, how have referendums changed? Well, that's the formal method. How have they changed the meaning? In this instance, as you said, it's actually the written component. Then I'd be looking at referral. Yeah, I can talk about referral of powers, Murray-Darling plan. I can talk about terrorism laws, and unchallenged legislation, CSIRO and the Australian Space Agency. Yeah, actually, I could do this. But so many students look at it and go, there are so many components to that, it's too hard.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in the marking guide for this question, they mentioned you didn't have to discuss all 3 in equal depth.
Absolutely. Very good point. A lot of students assume everything has to have the same amount of words to it.
Yeah, whereas I figured students would have more evidence and more discussion points for referendums, whereas referrals of powers and unchallenged legislation would just be very specific examples.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's have a look at a sample introduction for this.
Would you like to read it, Daniel?
Shall we read it aloud? Okay, so a constitution is a set of principles according to which a nation is governed. Since 1901, the text and meaning of the Commonwealth Constitution have evolved owing to formal and informal methods of change. Formal change alters the wording of the Constitution through referendums, formal polls held for eligible voters to approve amendments, as proposed by the Commonwealth Parliament. It's one of the positives I mentioned earlier. This process, outlined in Section 128 of the Constitution, has seen limited use and as a result has not led to significant change. Since 1901, only 8 out of 45 proposals have passed, such as that establishing federal judges' retirement ages in 1977. Informal change alters the meaning and application of the Constitution without changing its wording. This can occur through referrals of state power, such as anti-terror laws in 2003, and Commonwealth legislation passed without an appropriate head of power, such as that establishing the CSIRO. Though more frequently used than referenda, these methods have also failed to produce significant change, as states have sought to preserve their legislative powers. In turn, the claim has limited validity. Though all three methods have produced change in the Commonwealth Constitution, none have done so significantly. Now,
okay, I think you've got it there. You've done your definitions. You've explained what change is. You've explained what formal and informal are, and you've even brought into there the examples you're going to be discussing in greater detail.
Yeah, all the 4 dot points that we outlined earlier, you can see them reflected in this introduction, and this introduction is manageable. It's like just over 150 words. So written out, I can't imagine it taking up a third of the page, maybe half. Half a page.
And there is no correct size for an introduction.
No, not at all. But it's manageable within the time constraints that you have. Because I recognize a lot of people will look at little paragraphs and go, well, can I do that within 15 minutes? Under time with a question I've never seen before.
Correct.
But I think this is manageable, especially when you consider, like, I'm just, sort of hinting at the evidence I'm going to discuss, very brief mentions of it.
And if you have planned your response, this should just flow very, very smoothly for you.
So you're saying that students should plan their responses?
I know they call me a radical, but
taking some time to unpack a question and figure out how you can most effectively respond to it will always result, in my experience, in a higher mark.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that question was an evaluate question. But sometimes students see evaluate and analyze or even assess, and they think they mean the same thing.
And they are not.
They are very, very different from each other. How do we know this? Well, SCASA tells us. They've very helpfully gave us a glossary.
Indeed, and this is universal. This is every single ATAR course uses the same glossary. So these words mean the same, even in those alien subjects like biology or whatever. Analyze and evaluate mean the same thing. As in they're different terms, but they mean the same thing in politics and law.
So if we take the meaning from that glossary, so evaluate means to ascertain the value. That means to determine, to make a judgment about the value or amount of, and to make that judgment carefully. So if you are asked to make a judgment about the significance, you are using words like sort of to a limited extent or to a moderate extent.
To a significant extent.
Yes, because you are trying to indicate the extent, the value, the amount of, or the amount to which that claim that you're evaluating is true.
Exactly.
Analyze, on the other hand, is you are more identifying the components, the parts of something, how those parts relate to each other, and then also drawing out the implications for the political and legal system. Or whatever it is you are asked to analyse with regards
to. I like to think of it as you're making predictions about what's likely to happen or why it happened this way. It's less personal opinion, less emotion to it.
Do you want to explain these 2 examples?
Sure, absolutely. So let's go to evaluate example. The unchallenged funding of universities has been significant in giving the Commonwealth important influence over the states not provided for in the Constitution. So the use of the word significant and the use of the word important are giving us a value. That is, we can ascertain how much the unchallenged funding of universities is actually worth in relation to a particular question about unchallenged legislation. If we go to the example of analysis, given the issues of increased Commonwealth power and disagreement by state premiers, history indicates a referendum proposal to give the Commonwealth power to legislate on local government is likely to fail. So what this is drawing on, it's actually looking at what has happened in the past and is making a prediction on what will happen in the future. It's analysing what are the key components of a failed referendum: increasing Commonwealth power, increase disagreement between state premiers, and also what the history of a referendum will tell us. So evaluate is how the value you give to a particular argument, a particular idea. Analysis is simply trying to draw a conclusion.
Absolutely. I'm just actually going to get rid of us. Let's try that. Oof.
Oh God, that was a hideous thing
I'm
to
so
say.
sorry.
Should be a trigger warning.
Let's try. Okay, should still be working, hopefully. And I'll just make sure this works. Let's try that. Oh,
God, that was a hideous thing.
Okay, my God, we are back.
Do you want to remove the vision?
Oh,
There we go.
that's
That's the text that's coming up.
Oh, God bless. All right, we're good to go. Alicia, thank you so much for guiding us through this wonderful experience. Sorry about our internet issues, my internet issues, nothing to do with where we are. Where are we? So we just left off talking through this model paragraph, where we'd split up a paragraph on referrals of power into multiple parts because we felt like it made its points clearer.
Yeah, greater clarity.
Greater clarity, more discussion in the second half with a more robust link to an overall evaluation, whereas in the first half, just addressing what a referral of power is, giving an example and illustrating how it changes the Constitution. Now, in some body paragraphs, there is a temptation to just write in detail.
What I call a narrative.
Absolutely, and that is what the marker feedback from SCASA also says.
And it's the same for modern history.
Yes, is that some students know examples so well and they've dedicated so much study time.
And they've written it in their practice essays so extensively.
That they really do just sort of get the definition out of the way and just jump straight into an example and give a, on this particular date, this happened.
1975 crisis is just the best for that one.
They just give this overarching historical narrative. But again,
which means there's no evaluation, there's no analysis, there's merely context.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, if you look at that marking guide, you're not providing any sort of discussion. You are not linking it to some broader point about a concept you're discussing.
You're making general statements.
So if, for instance, I just went into like a more detailed narrative about, 9/11 in 2001.
Yes.
And went into detail about how this caused, general hysteria amongst the public. And as a result, it motivated the state governments to refer their powers to the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
And I did that in more detail. That wouldn't actually warrant any more marks here.
Because the example is merely the vehicle, is merely the light that shines, that you can apply what you're talking about. The example is not actually the essay. The example is the proof. It's the evidence to back up your statement.
And that is why I think in this marking guide, it talks about supportive examples. If you're providing examples that are irrelevant or that are not made up or not sufficiently linked to your point, then you cannot get marks.
Indeed. If you were to say, for example, Mabo, for example, Mabo demonstrated the power of the High Court to set aside stare decisis and establish a new precedent. Then you've got it.
Yeah, then we're talking. So no, the more detailed the example, not necessarily the better. And also, I think if you're going into too much detail, you're arguably wasting time. You could be spending more time on an evaluation.
The amount of times I've written on essays, why are you telling me this? And I'm trying to be nice.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is the final one for body paragraphs is I can evaluate. This is one that gets me. I can evaluate or even analyze by restating my thesis at the end of each paragraph.
It is that classic, which my students hate me saying, correlation and causation are not the same thing. Just by stating, which proves the Constitution is hard to change. What?
And I think these two myths they should be paired together because often what I find is students will give a detailed narrative of an example and then go, oh, I forgot to link that to my point and just put their thesis at the end.
Exactly, which proves the point. No.
It's not quite right. So we often talk about, as we showed in that model paragraph, evaluating through the paragraph. Or constantly returning to your evaluation. However, this informal method of constitutional change is limited. Therefore, not only is this method rare, but states would only refer their powers in areas of limited significance. And then at the end, sort of directly returning to the terminology of the question and making an explicit link, just in case the marker just misses it.
And that is actually a point you're going to come up with, is that the marker is going to read everything over and over again until they get your point.
Yeah, which is not the case, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, exactly.
But certainly, who was it? I think it was Ben Basil from All Saints College, who talks about beat the marker, as in beat them over the head with your evaluation. Like, continually return to your evaluation throughout the paragraph.
Yes, just don't make as I'm trying to say, don't make a simplistic statement of therefore it is true. No, you've still got to have you've got to have meat to that sentence that brings it in.
You have to have supporting reasons, not just saying therefore referrals of power are not significant, but referrals of power are not as significant because.
Exactly, because it's evaluation. There's a value. What is giving that value? Yeah,
and I think something that maybe isn't reflected in that glossary is that if you don't have a discussion, if you haven't examined both sides of an argument, then you haven't evaluated.
You've made a general statement.
Yeah. Okay, so we're on to conclusion. A conclusion is just a summary of my body paragraphs. Well, let's look at, once again, the marking guide. So to get a 3 out of 3 conclusion, you need to draw together the argument linking the evidence. So if you've planned effectively, and I tell my students this, like, you're under time pressure, you put so much effort into your body paragraphs, you can write a really effective conclusion in 5 to 6 minutes if you've planned your essay and you know what evidence you've talked about throughout your paragraphs.
Yes. And this is practice.
Yes, but that's it. If you practice conclusions, and especially like if you've done this throughout the year in preparation for your in-class assessments, then you should be trained into the habit of writing 5 to 6 succinct conclusions, 5 to 6 minutes succinct conclusions. So, in my view, if we draw together the argument, you've got to think of it as each of your body paragraphs being like a thread where you have sort of developed a supporting argument that supports your overall thesis. And you are drawing them together to show how they work to support that overall argument. And that must, as it says here, include your evidence. You must return to the most significant evidence that you've discussed and how you've used it to support your overall argument.
That's it. That is exactly it. No.
So this is for the exact same question that we were looking at before. This is the conclusion that I came up with. Again, you're sort of talking about a third to half of a page, manageable within time constraints, especially because you are repeating a lot of you're not coming up with it on the spot, you're repeating a lot of the information. You're not having to sit and think. So, the Commonwealth Constitution was designed to be difficult to change in both its wording and application. This supports the principle of constitutionalism and prevents hasty change being made to Australia's fundamental law.
I like it.
You like it?
I do like it.
Do you think it's like a necessary start?
Yes, it's a thesis statement for a conclusion.
As seen in the Constitutional Alterational Social Services Act 1946.
Which we assume is in the main body.
Yeah, if I've discussed it in my referendum paragraph.
Do not ever raise anything new in a conclusion because it's not evidence.
And you haven't used it to support your argument. You're not drawing together your argument if you're introducing it.
You're actually making a new statement.
Yeah. So referendums have altered the wording of the Constitution with noteworthy consequences. However, as in 1999, institutional and political barriers have more frequently contributed to their failure, limiting their overall significance. Likewise, informal methods of constitutional change have had limited impact. While referrals of power required to create the Family Court of Australia in 1975, dropping in that evidence, and unchallenged legislation required to pass the Science and Industry Research Act of 1949, which sustains the CSIRO, have been more frequently successful, they have offered limited change to the meaning of the Constitution. This is largely due to the state's reluctance to increase Commonwealth power. Therefore, this claim has limited validity. Though these methods may alter the meaning and operation of the Constitution, none of the resulting changes can be considered significant. So as I've gone through here, I haven't just recapped, this is what was in paragraph 1, like referendums, this is what was in paragraph 2, referrals of power, and then unchallenged legislation. For each paragraph, I have actually drawn out the supporting argument. So for instance, saying there are plenty of barriers that get in the way of referendums being frequently passed. In fact, they're very infrequently passed. Referrals of power are infrequently used, as is unchallenged legislation, because the state's reluctance to hand over power to the Commonwealth is there. So I've drawn out those supporting arguments, and then, and only then, have I returned to my overall thesis.
You are writing what English teachers would call a persuasive argument.
Absolutely.
You're bringing the evidence in, and you are persuading the reader that your point of view is the most valid point of view on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And in your sort of final sentence, don't feel like you shouldn't use the terminology of the question. If you use the terminology of the question, it will be most obvious to the marker that you are addressing the question directly.
As Ben Basil says,
yes, beat the marker. And so you see, if you maybe at a later date go back to that question or look at the 2022 marking guide and have a look at this question. I believe it was question 8.
Ooh, yes. Yeah, it was unit 3.
Yes. Then you can see that I'm using a lot of the words in the question. I'm using the word significant. I'm talking about how they do alter the meaning and operation of the Constitution, because that is what is mentioned in the actual question itself.
That is where your value is.
Yep. And I've highlighted them there for you. I wish I remembered that before.
I've got it here on the screen.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Oh, dear.
Our favourite. If I memorize essays, Mr. Roseveare has just put his head in his hands. If I memorize essays, I will be more prepared. Now, I am going to confess something. When I was doing my WACE exams, I was guilty of this.
I'm sure I have certainly been guilty of that.
Yes.
Teachers can be terrible, but like doctors, we don't like taking our own medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly gone down that path, but teaching content like this for a long time, I've learned that I prefer to practice brainstorming.
Yes.
I prefer to practice introductions, conclusions, and planning rather than an essay. And then what I like to do is I like to change an operative word. I like to change a key term out of it, which forces me to change my planning and my prep. I'm a flowchart writer for when I do my planning. And I still do sit exams. I do not practice a specific exam. It locks my mind into that. And that leads us into the trap when you see an essay question that says Parliament thesis, and you've studied about how the Senate is wonderful at restoring Parliament thesis, but you missed the part that it says the House of Representatives is an effective supporter of Parliament thesis, and you end up talking about the Senate rather than the House of Reps. That is a surprisingly common mistake that students make. And they don't read, and you are allowed to highlight in your essays. So get your highlighter as soon as pens are up and highlight the 2 or 3 parts of the essay, and in your introduction or in your planning, identify where those 2 or 3 parts are appearing. And you might suddenly discover, oh gosh, I actually have to talk about both chambers of the Parliament rather than just the one I prepared for. I wonder what the other question was about.
I do wonder if in last year's WACE exam, there were some students who had sort of prepared essays on how wonderful High Court judgments are at changing the meaning of the Constitution. And included that in their response to the essay question that we've been looking at.
Yeah.
Because that's just what they had prepared. But ultimately, if they did that, they would have got no marks.
Yes.
Because that is not what the question asks for. So you run the risk of, if you don't directly answer the question that you've been asked, and only the question that you've been asked, you will be penalized because a lot of your answer will be irrelevant.
Correct.
And I have seen this throughout the year. I'm sure many teachers have seen this throughout the year. If students memorize essays, even if they do it fairly well, they are always slightly off.
Indeed. It would be an extraordinary occasion in which if you were asked an essay question word for word that you have practiced.
Yeah,
so don't do it to yourself.
Because imagine and that's quite a heavy gamble. They can only ask 4 essay questions in the WACE. They can pick any of the syllabus dot points.
Absolutely.
To assess you on, and you're going to gamble on a very specific wording of a very specific dot point.
Because your teachers told you that limitations to the power of Prime Minister hasn't appeared in the last 2 exams. It'll be in this one. Or it must be an essay. No, it could be a 2-mark question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I also, one thing I liked particularly about what your conclusion was saying was that the claim was invalid. If you can go back to that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
The claim has limited validity, that third last line. There is a tendency for some students to assume that because the WACE exam is so important, despite the fact we tell you it's not, despite the fact that, politics and law is such a wonderful subject, despite the fact it's really hard, the fact that in March, April, somebody wrote the exam you're now sitting and they've made a claim and you have to evaluate it, doesn't actually mean the claim is valid. A lot of students assume that because it's declared in this amazingly powerful WACE exam that's going to define what university you get to go to, therefore the claim must be valid. I'm going to have to agree with the person who made this claim. No, we could be setting you up to actually argue against it. So don't go in, please don't look at a question and go, I'm going to support every claim that's in there because this exam is so important. We're not after that. We're after your capacity to evaluate or analyse.
Yeah. Because if you looked at this question and you thought, man, they're talking about referrals of power, it's got to be significant.
Yes, absolutely.
Then you're in for a world of pain.
Absolutely. So be prepared to disagree, because if you are brainstorming your response, that's how you determine your value. Or by the looks of it, it's actually not that important. Phew, thank goodness I saw that.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
My handwriting does not matter. The marker will keep reading until they understand it. And you can substitute handwriting for syntax and grammar and all those
spelling.
Spelling in some instances, yes.
Absolutely. I love reading something till my eyes bleed.
Yes. If you have to take this in the context of the WACE exam, where markers are reading hundreds of responses, and they have to be efficient about it.
They've got a set amount of time.
And if your handwriting just is illegible, even the kindest of markers is at some point going to have to give up, because if they don't, they just won't get on with the job that they've been given. Indeed.
And therefore, what you're missing out on are those 17 marks that are set aside for discussion of relevant issues and evaluation and assessment. If the marker can't see that you're discussing it, if the marker can't see that you're evaluating or analysing, how can the marker give you any marks?
Absolutely. And a key pet peeve that sort of falls under this as well, and something that has been brought up in the marker feedback, uncommon abbreviations. Where students are looking to save time, and so they want to, chuck everything in brackets in an abbreviation.
Mine is an uppercase P with a circle around it for Parliament.
Oh,
but please do not use that in an exam. I think if there's any markers listening, they're going to spot my students. No, my students wouldn't do that. Always, if you're going to use an abbreviation, preferably it could be an acronym or an initialism. So it might be HCA, High Court of Australia.
Absolutely.
That would be okay. PM for Prime Minister. COMM period, I would accept as Commonwealth.
Yes.
But there's a certain level of judgment you have to put in here. Do I write Prime Minister and then in parentheses write PM? I'd write Prime Minister first as a courtesy, and thereafter, if I'm running out of time, I would abbreviate to PM, or PM and C if it's Prime Minister and Cabinet. But there are certainly the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia. I don't need to write, just write Constitution.
Absolutely.
Okay, you don't need to do the full words. We know what you mean, but please do not just make up, or if your teacher's just made up an abbreviation, really do check to see that it's acceptable common language.
Yeah, and keep in mind there are some abbreviations that are implicitly in the syllabus. You talk about the Federal Executive Council,
FEC or FedEx.
Absolutely. So, and political scientists, lawyers, people who use these words all the time, they use abbreviations, but they are recognized and they are widely used. That's the point.
Yes, indeed. If you were to, there are some initialisms. What's the Australian Federation Reform Council? It lasted 2 years or something like that. You may not want to write AFRC because it's actually really such a short-lived thing. It's actually quite an important thing if you want to do an essay on changing nature of federalism. But you would still have to write the full one for that because it is such a relatively obscure agency. But COAG, not that we really focus much anymore, but COAG, you'd have to write Council of Australian Government, but then you could just write COAG thereafter.
Absolutely.
Because we're not expecting you to write a dissertation here.
No, and COAG, that abbreviation is in the syllabus.
Yes.
So it's recognised that we will recognise what that means.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as a courtesy,
so just be judicial and careful.
And I know a lot of maybe the viewers who are students who are watching this might think, oh, well, this is sort of slim pickings. These are very minor issues. But if your handwriting is illegible, and you're using lots of abbreviations, and your grammar makes it so that I have to keep rereading.
And you've got asterisks, see page 23, or worse, You don't even tell us where it continues because the marker does not have to go hunting on a digital screen to look for where your essay continues.
Yes, and keep in mind, like, it's digital now. So if you're doing lots of asterisks and some of your writing has tended into that, the edge of the paper where the scanner cuts off.
Or going up the line.
Yeah, it just makes it so impossible to read. And all of these things work together to take away marks.
Good planning should obviate that.
Absolutely.
Also, because it's scanned, don't use erasable pens.
Interesting, good tip.
Because the scanners get very hot and they'll just erase your ink.
Great tip.
Really good tip.
I've never heard that
Don't use liquid paper. Just scratch it out. Just cross it out.
Yeah, just cross it out. Absolutely.
It's actually a lot quicker than waiting for the liquid paper to dry.
Okay. Good tip at the end. Okay.
Well, could I also actually mention, you said about handwriting doesn't matter. You're in competition with 850 to 950 students at any given period. So you will need to be ranked within that scale of students. The better the handwriting, the better the spelling, the better the punctuation, the better the effect you give to the marker. Now, I'm not going to say that there are no marks that are set aside for spelling, but it's all within this capacity for discussion, that you are intelligent, that you are clear, that you are thoughtful in what you're doing. And if you can present that through your presentation of writing, you are moving higher up that group of 850 to 950 students.
Okie doke.
How do you improve?
So how should you prepare for essays in the WAIS, given that we are less than 6 days out from the WAIS exam? So as Alex said earlier, rather than writing entire essays, you are trying to be flexible. You are trying to take your knowledge and be adaptable, be able to apply it to lots of different questions. So writing essay plans is a really good way to go about that. Write essay plans and introductions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's sort of what I put down the bottom, like practicing essay components under timed conditions. So for instance, once you got an essay plan, leaving it for a couple of days and then trying to write an introduction in sort of, 6 to 7 minutes or however long you think is appropriate for an introduction.
Yeah.
And that way you're still sort of targeting the WAIS exam. You're not going to get in there and write a body paragraph in 20 minutes and take up a lot of time. But at the same time, you are still being flexible in your approach and you are not essentially memorizing essays, even if you don't want to admit it.
Oh, that's true. If you look at that second point as well, look at your assessments, but also look at the way you approached your assessments, particularly your mock exam and your semester 1 exam. Did you do essays first? Did you do essays last? Did you brainstorm and plan your essays as soon as you could lift up your pen, but you went straight to short answer and source analysis? Because if your brain is like mine, it needs time to percolate ideas. And then you can, every time you come across a short answer question and you go, oh, while I'm answering it, I've just realized that's a point I need to raise in my essay. So that works for me. But for other people, writing their essays is their strength, and they really want to put their time into making sure that's good. And they leave the 2 mark questions right until the end.
That's what I would do.
That's what you do. But you should only know that because you have tried and tested it. My year 11s get the shock of their lives when they get me. No, just when they get me, actually, it's the year 11s. But they do get a shock of their lives when I actually tell them year 11 is your year to fail. This is the year, not to actually fail the course, but to see what works for you. So for those of you preparing for your year 12 end of year exams, your 8-hour exams for P&L, hopefully you have used your last 4 batches of exams to know the order that you take it in. That is partly what that second point means. A really good assessment is something that you learn from. It is not just a mark that you get.
Absolutely.
So go back to your past essays and work out the timing that you put into each section.
On top of the school-based assessments that you use, don't forget that you can still, and you should, still get feedback from your teacher. They are there to support you and, support your success in the way. So when you do these essay plans, don't just go, yep, I've done it, and close the book and go, oh, I'll do another one tomorrow. Take to give you feedback and little advice on how to adjust the structure of your essay, or a point that you forgot, or an important piece of evidence that you're not quite right. Little changes that can make all the difference in the WAIS exam.
Absolutely.
And I've just included, this is just a template. I think Ben Basil, once again, has given me this template that I use for essay planning, which is just simply like, and again, I've sort of fallen into the trap of an introduction and 3 body paragraphs, but that's what I can fit on an A4 page. But you could easily extend this and add extra columns for a 4th paragraph or a 5th paragraph, like break it down however you want. But essentially, like take an A4 page, write out what you think the structure of your introduction is going to be. So what terms are you going to define explicitly, and give it a go? What is your thesis statement going to be? And what is the key pieces of evidence you anticipate on using? Then plan out your body paragraphs. How are you going? Are you need to define key terms? Are you going to have a however statement throughout your body paragraph where you introduce a discussion element? So say you've talked about how referrals of power have altered the meaning of the Constitution. However, they are limited because da 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 da.
Indeed. Are there any contemporary issues that your teacher should have gone through with you in the last year that you could have attached to
absolutely what
you're doing? So
just setting it out on paper and doing so relatively quickly will help you prepare for the WACE, I think. Okay, so at this point, we have finished our little presentation, but I would be interested if the people in the chat have any questions for us. Now, it's going to take them a while for them to actually hear this 20-second delay.
Oh, okay.
But if you have any questions about about the WACE exam, about essay writing, please drop them in the chat, and we will.
Nope, somebody did drop out. At 17:34. Fast master.
Oh, that's fourth. No, don't worry.
Oh, that's all good.
All good. I hope.
Well, she could there and then not.
This is when the internet dropped out.
Yeah.
So that's all fine. Just trying to think if there's anything else that we haven't covered.
Oh, liberal democratic principles. 2 of them are very common essay questions.
And as in like having
comparison to another country.
Yeah, comparison to another country.
Very common. However, that said,
who knows?
Who knows? Know everything.
Yeah, know everything. Certainly go through the syllabus systematically.
I'd actually like to know how teachers would go if they had to actually sit the exam.
Well, given that I've taught all the syllabus documents, I hope I'll do it.
No, I mean, yeah, fair enough then. Yes. I certainly have taught students who could write better essays than me.
That's it. I do now. I take a lot more time with my writing, so I worry how I'd go time-wise, fussing over.
But they're young and they've got agile minds.
Okay, we've got no other questions coming through to us. This is your last chance before we sign off and I process this for a recording. I think we covered everything. Okay. I think
thanks everyone.
That's enough time. Thank you very much. I will stop the recording in just a moment. Should I study? Don't study. What do we...
I would actually say this: do not assume that if you've done well in your last 4 8-hour exams, that you have done well. I've certainly had plenty of students who thought they did really well before they did their politics exam and didn't need to try. It was their politics exam that saved them.
Yeah, and particularly given that it's, the last week,
yeah.
Monday of the last week. I imagine that some people might be feeling a bit demotivated. Tired, seeing maybe some of their friends go on leavers.
But what inspiration, I got a politics exam on Monday. I'm pumped. Is COVID-19 likely to be in the essay question? Cheapest. If it were, it would be cooperative federalism, executive power, secret ministries.
It's certainly not going to, because
it won't be a specific question.
No, because there's no syllabus dot point that mentions COVID-19. But there are COVID-19 as a
as recent.
As a recent issue, certainly links into so many different syllabus dot points. Prime Minister power,
Parliament thesis.
Yeah, so much accountability of the Parliament, given that shutdown briefing. 100%.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be assessed directly, but if that is a recent example that you are able to discuss and link to different syllabus dot points effectively, then that's going to benefit you in your essays 100%. Everyone has their favorite examples.
Workpack and Rosato is mine.
Really?
Love it.
This year we have done the energy price relief bills that Albanese passed. Has just come up because it was passed in a single day.
Yeah.
It involves gag motions in both the houses.
Oh, it's rich, isn't it?
It's just a useful one.
I'm going to borrow your notes now.
All right, I think we've reached we're scraping the bottom of the barrel now. Could Anthony Albanese beat Peter Dutton in a fight? We will see in 2025, maybe.
Well, one's a former cop, so
we know exactly. All right, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any other questions, please feel free to message them through to the PLEAWA Instagram account, and we maybe get back to you. Have a wonderful afternoon. We hope this has been useful to you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.